First of all, thank you so much, University of Colorado Denver Professor Christoph Stefes, who joins us today, who teaches classes on Russia and European politics. He also taught and researched in the former Soviet Union. Professor Stefes has also taught at the University of Colorado at Denver for the last 20 years. Professor Stefes, thank you so much for joining us here today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, first of all, of course, the big topic we want to talk about with you today is the Ukraine-Russia conflict, with Russia invading the Ukraine starting late on Wednesday night, our time, early Thursday morning, Ukrainian time. Can you start by giving us a bit of an overarching overview of this conflict and why Russia is invading the Ukraine?
So Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union itself was the colonial empire of Russia, so to say. All of that fell apart in 1991. Ukraine became independent and had nuclear weapons, which it surrendered to Russia in exchange for security guarantees, which were signed in 1994. So for us, of course, the invasion of Russia into Ukraine is a gross violation of these treaties and, of course, of the United Nations Charter. It's deeply disturbing because we haven't seen such a gross violation of international law in a long, long time. So this is problematic. So why is this happening? That's a really good question. There are, of course, many sides to the story. Russia claims various things. Russia claims that Ukraine poses a security risk to Russia, if not now, maybe in the future, because once it joins NATO, NATO is going to be right at the border of Russia. It also claims that actually Ukraine really belongs to Russia. Historically, you could see it just the other way around, that Russia belongs to Ukraine. So, but what is it really about? If you ask my personal opinion, it is clearly about Putin trying to reestablish the old Soviet glory of Russia, dominating the neighbors. In its neighborhood, we call it the near abroad, Russia's near abroad. And it has started this in 2008 already with the invasion of Georgia, helping separatists there to break free from Georgia once and for all. Then, of course, 2014, they moved into Crimea and then annexed Crimea. Crimea now is a part of Russia, not, of course, by international law, because we still consider this to be highly illegal, this annexation. Most states in the world do that, I would say 90% plus. And now we see the invasion of Ukraine. So that is about the background of the conflict, of the invasion.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself there. Without sounding ignorant, I apologize if this comes across that way. This may come across to many Americans as, okay, this is a faraway conflict involving Vladimir Putin, perhaps reestablishing the old Soviet geopolitical sphere. Why does this matter to Americans, to Coloradans? Why should this matter to us?
Okay. In a way, you could always ask that question, right? Because any kind of conflict is far away from the United States. You do not have a conflict with Canada. You don't have a conflict with Mexico. So any kind of conflict is far away. In the Middle East, be it in China, with Taiwan, the question really is, ultimately, is the United States willing to still be the defender of democracy and human rights in a way in the world? Or does it want to retreat like it did before World War I, and then disappeared? And then we know what happened next, the rise of Hitler, communism. So I believe that the United States has a strong interest in holding up these democratic values worldwide. It has not always, acted this way, but, generally speaking, at least since the end of the Cold War, we know that the United States has really promoted democracy and has had some success, especially in Central Europe. So that's the first question, right? Is the United States willing to uphold this position of defender of democracy? But the other question is really an economic reason too, right? So we see that the rise of autocratic powers, non-democratic powers throughout the world. We see China, we see Russia, of course, Turkey, and so on and so forth. And these are building very close, not just political alliances, they also build economic alliances. And does the United States still want to be economically embedded in the world economy, or does it want to be a bystander or a second rate actor? And I think the United States has, economically speaking, a great interest in staying connected with its democratic allies around the world and to make sure that autocratic regimes do not take over.
Well, thank you for that. And again, I apologize. That does come off as a little ignorant, but I think that is a question that is weighing on a lot of Americans' minds. With that said, would you, and this is an admittedly difficult question because there's going to be a lot of speculation inherently in what I'm about to ask, but let's say Russia does succeed. As of Friday morning when we were discussing this, the Russian forces were on the outskirts of Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine. It appeared probably increasingly likely that Ukraine could fall, Kyiv could fall in the next few days, according to U.S. intelligence sources. So with that in mind, let's say Russia does succeed and they do overthrow the democratically elected government of Volodymyr Zelensky, and Ukraine becomes perhaps an autocratic government, or one that's got a puppet government that's installed by Putin. What happens next? Does Putin stop there? Does he target the Baltic states? Does he target EU states? What is the next potential step for Putin after this?
Well, first of all, I think that Ukraine, President Zelensky will surrender within the next 2 or 3 days. One has to say President Zelensky has done a wonderful job, an admirable job, leading Ukraine through the biggest crisis of its history. And I don't think that he wants more bloodshed than absolutely necessary. And it seems at this point that the Russian forces are simply overwhelming the Ukrainian forces. There's very little, I haven't seen much of resistance. I heard 1,000 Russian soldiers died. That is certainly a big number. This is out of 200,000 Russian soldiers. So, and I don't think that President Zelensky wants to necessarily, have the Ukrainians suffer more than they have to. So surrender, and this is what the Russians demand. The Russians say, let's negotiate, but what they really want is what they call the demilitarization and the denazification. What they actually mean is taking out any anti-Russian forces there and pro-Russian political forces. And so you're absolutely right. The ultimate end goal of Russia is the installation of a puppet regime that is going to be very Russia-friendly. They did so before, by attacking this democratic pro-Western candidate back in, I think it was in 2004, out of which came the Orange Revolution, and they lost that attempt, or they didn't succeed in this attempt to install or keep in power a pro-Russian president. Now, what does that mean in the long run? Russia will feel emboldened. There's no doubt about this. This has been a relatively quick victory that many people did not expect. I expected it actually to be a relatively quick military invasion. And so where does he stop? I don't think that he will stop in Ukraine. I think the next countries on his list are probably Moldova. Moldova is very pro-Western. And pro-Western is relatively weak. You do not have to send 200,000 troops in there. I think 20,000 would almost be enough. It all depends on the end. Will the West react decisively with economic sanctions? What I see right now is not encouraging. The economic sanctions look a little bit lukewarm to me. Maybe there's another round of sanctions later, but keeping, for instance, Russia in the SWIFT system so that they can still access international currencies, I find that not a particularly good idea. It seems that the Europeans still want to buy oil and gas from Russia so that they can keep the gas prices low and the oil prices low. That might be in the interest of the consumers. It's not in the interest of international security for sure. Will they attack any other countries that are member of the European Union and or NATO? I don't think that Putin is that irrational. I don't find him particularly rational these days. I find him quite unhinged, frankly speaking. But attacking any NATO member means World War III. And I don't think that he is able to or is willing to, start World War III.
Well, with that said, and perhaps playing a little bit of devil's advocate in this sense, is if he is trying to reunify the old Soviet Union, of course, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania were a part of that. And they are also NATO countries, and they have, I believe it's Estonia and Latvia that have sizable Russian minorities. Is there a worry that he would try and start something in one of those countries?
I think that is unlikely. That these are NATO members. I don't see that. I don't think that he is going to try to attack any of those countries. Not overtly with military forces, maybe some cyber attacks or something like that. But he has been doing this for years and years and years now. We could see that, but I don't think that it would lead to anything. I mean, at least not to any big gains that Russia could, like cyber attacks don't really, they hurt the other side, but they don't necessarily, you don't gain from it much. But a military invasion of the Baltic countries, I just don't see it. And the NATO partners have made it clear that they consider these three Baltic countries to be full NATO members. Any attack means attack on everyone, and there's going to be, a military counterattack, which then would, it's unimaginable what that would end up like.
Well, I suppose with that in mind, is there anything else that you would like to add to help put this this conflict into greater context and an understanding about how and why this matters?
Well, I think that if we would think about Putin and the future, Putin, he seems to be like this strong man, right? He's a typical kind of strong man. He has his speeches of a strong man and so on and so forth. I personally believe that he is actually a weak leader. From everything that I have studied about Putin, he has become more and more of what I would call a lone wolf. His circle of advisors is relatively small. He's actually not really listening to them anymore. His erratic speeches to his own Security Council and so on and so forth don't really show the picture of a strong and confident leader. I think he's operating from a position of weakness. And if we were to impose very hard economic sanctions, and sure, they would also hurt us. But if we were to impose them, I think in the medium run, we would probably see Putin being toppled by some of his own people, by his own government maybe, or maybe by the people from the street. We don't know. Like for the past 10, 20 years, repression of civil society has been strong in Russia. So we don't really know where that would come from. But we have seen people in Russia demonstrating against Putin, demonstrating against the war, courageous, brave people who actually went to the streets. And to us, the solution can only be to remove this belligerent, aggressive man from power. And we cannot do it, of course. We cannot go into, we can't go to Moscow and remove him from the Kremlin. It has to come from inside, and we have to encourage people to do that. And maybe it's a little bit also kind of a negative encouragement through sanctions, of course, but also positive encouragement, support of civil society, sending clear signals to people around Putin that they're not considered to be the enemy of the West. I believe that we need to make sure that he's leaving office sooner rather than later.
With that in mind, I guess I had a follow-up question to what you just said. You're saying that perhaps harsher sanctions could make an impact in this situation. What is your overall assessment about President Biden and how he and the United States have handled an admittedly difficult situation here?
I think he has a remarkable job, really, frankly. As much as the Republicans would like to portray him as weak, but I think the House GOP sent out this picture, and this is how weakness looks. And they had Biden's back, a picture of Biden's back, but this is not the reality. The reality is that he has reached out to the European partners. He has made sure that the transatlantic relationship stands firm. He coordinated all of these economic sanctions that are currently going on. The diplomacy has been admirable. And I believe that Biden has done a really good job in this crisis. Also not overreacting, at the same time also not, telling us that Putin is a great leader, as our former president has done just recently on, I don't know where he was actually publishing this. So I have to say Biden did a good job.
Well, Professor Stefes, we really appreciate your insight on a variety of your expertise here on Russia and European politics, and of course now, unfortunately, but your expertise is very needed. But University of Colorado Denver Professor Christoph Stefes, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.